Hola y bienvenidos. Welcome to a plática on higher education brought to you from the San Diego Chicano Latino Concilio on higher education. I'm Dr. Patrick Velasquez, a co-chair of the San Diego Concilio. The focus of our program today is the Concilio itself, and I'm joined by a longtime member of the Concilio, Dr. Alberto Ochoa. So welcome, Alberto. Muchas gracias por venir. And could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in higher education for Chicano students?
Certainly, Patrick. Mil gracias por la invitación. My involvement in higher education starts probably in 1973 in the East Coast with University of Massachusetts. And then I was offered a tenure track position in 1975 at San Diego State. And so I was engaged with San Diego State from 1975 to 2013 as a faculty member, and also as someone that was brought in to challenge the system to create programs that responded to our community. Mm-hmm. At that time, our dean in the College of Education was Tomás Arciniega. And so he was strategic in bringing in a number of people with that challenge. So one of our major experiences over my career was the establishment of the Department of Policy Studies in Language and Cross-Cultural Education that is now named Dual Language Education. Mm-hmm. And of course, being one of the few faculty members, it was easily viewed that I needed to not only take care of my academic development, but also respond to the community that brought me. And that was the Chicano movement that put pressure on the university to begin bringing faculty who would respond and engage in community. So I took it seriously.
Great. So as you well know, Alberto, the Concilio in San Diego has been operating for over 30 years now. And we have several priorities in terms of the policies and practices at our local colleges and universities and the ways in which those impact Chicano students. So in our plática today, I wanted to start with the issue of how our local public colleges and universities build and maintain an equitable enrollment of Chicano students. And so, Alberto, can you share your perspective on how San Diego's higher education institutions are fulfilling that responsibility to our community?
Well, they're beginning to respond to that responsibility, and it's to the efforts of groups like Concilio. It's putting the pressure on the institution to create the pathways for our students to enter. And so, to your question, is related to what I would call the concept of critical mass. And I remember in one of our Concilio meetings, we challenged the President Hirschman in one of our meetings to why is it that we're close to over 50% of its students in San Diego County, and yet there's less than 30%. At that time, we were beginning to be an HSI, 25%. And right away, he mentioned, I see the gap, but in order for us to admit our students, we need to make sure that they qualify for the A to G requirements, the 15 courses that are required in order to enter. So when you begin looking at how universities are responding, you begin to question whether or not they have an outreach and articulation with not only the high schools, but the K-12 system in general. Because what we know is that 75% of our students who reach the 12th grade are underachieving. Mm-hmm. In other words, they are able to graduate from high school, but do not have the skills in the language arts nor the math. So in order for them to qualify, they begin through the community college. And then to the degree they're successful, and 70% and anywhere between 70 to 75% of our students enter college through the community college. So the junior college system in California It's a promising system that is being challenged not only to enroll more students, but more specifically to assure that the skill level of our students are in fact competitive for them to have an access to our four-year colleges. So critical mass becomes an important issue. The A2G becomes an important issue. And underlying all these issues is what degree is our K-12 system providing the academic rigor necessary for them to have access to our colleges. And in California, we have the Smart Balance assessment system, where we can identify every single district and every single school as to how well students are doing. And so there's a significant gap. And so part of my concern is that for our students to be able to enter college, we need to put pressure on the K-12 system, make sure that as early as in elementary, they have the necessary skills to be competitive.
I should mention also that one of the complex challenges that our Concilio faces is that we're concerned with monitoring the conditions of the three public universities, the four-year universities in San Diego, along with, I believe there are at least 11 credit-bearing community college campuses in San Diego. And they have certainly different issues. When we talk about enrollment, the one institution that's way behind the others is UC San Diego, which is, of course, the only UC campus in San Diego County and the most selective institution. And their enrollment has always lagged way behind the representation of Chicanos in the population of California. In any case, once we have Chicano students that are enrolled in our local colleges and universities, and especially when those institutions achieve what is called Hispanic serving institution status, the institutions certainly have a responsibility to serve our students in a way that maximizes their success. So I'd like to ask Alberto if you could talk about the issues that you see in our local institution regarding student success strategies, and including the degree to which we see support for programs like Puente and EOP that have actually documented success.
Yeah, and I think we need to look at a metric that begins with institutions that are not responsive, and institutions that go through the motions of providing programmatic services because they have some state or federal funding, and then institutions that are in fact active in creating support systems, such as Puente and EOP, and a few other programs that we have in our community colleges and also in our 4 years, the TRIO programs that you managed for many years, such as Oasis at the UC San Diego. And what I see overall is that these programs are in fact supporting probably 10–15% of the students that Chicano Latino that enter. But there's also a great need for those programs to be more, to reach out to a greater number of students. And what we know is that both Puente and EOP and a number of other programs do have an impact, but when you start looking at their evaluation data, they're impacting 125 students, 300 students. And so the critical mass, once again, is insufficient. So the program that we have in place in most of our colleges here in San Diego and in California, and also in the CSU system, are making an impact, but insufficient. Insufficient to assure that our students have the necessary access and support in order for them to be successful.
Yes, and as you mentioned, I worked at UC San Diego for almost 30 years and worked in student support services there. And it is true, it was always a battle to maintain even semi-adequate funding for the students who needed our services. And also there seems to be a problem in institutions locally with what I would call a diffusion of energy and resources, where if you look at most of our college campuses in San Diego, they can show us a big laundry list of programs and services that they say are serving Chicanos, but there's not coordination typically between those services. There's not administrative accountability. And so again, a lot of energy is duplicated and lost, and our students end up suffering in the process. So,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that while there are programs, there's no institutional support system that is part of the infrastructure that's consistently monitoring the progress of students, other than understanding where the gaps are. So there is data that provides us with patterns and direction as to what is needed. But again, our programs that are supportive, Puente, Mesa, and so on, are programs that begin to provide the pathway, but insufficient.
yes, and I saw another problem in that, for example, we might see Chicano students that are struggling in courses such as chemistry, basic chemistry, or math, different levels of math. And the institution never looks at the chemistry department or the math department to see if they have the sort of strategic approaches that are most likely to have success with Chicano students. Instead, the finger is consistently pointed at programs like Oasis or Puente or EOP for not doing enough work. Another thing we know, Alberto, from the scholarly literature, which is voluminous, that's one of the positive things about Chicanos in higher education right now in 2022. We have decades of scholarly research on Chicano student success, and we know what works. And one of the things that we found is that diverse curriculum and inclusive pedagogy, especially that is found in Chicano studies programs, it does contribute to a lot of positive outcomes for Chicano Latino students. So, Alberto, what is your sense of how our local institutions are doing in terms of their support for Chicano studies?
At the junior college level, what I see from outside looking in, I would say one of tolerance, that we have those ethnic studies program, and some of our experiences collectively have been that this faculty are responding to multiple issues, and they really don't have the necessary support to be part of the university holistic curriculum. But Chicano studies, as you have mentioned in terms of the research literature, do provide evidence of importance, specifically for my own experience graduating from Lincoln High School in LA. That was one of the initial high schools that with the dropout movement, resistance to the dropout started. That our graduates, including myself, when you enter college in the first year, you're totally are entering a totally different world that is strange to you, and it does not take into consideration your background, your experiences, or the assets that you bring to the institution, which sort of leads me to this theoretical construct of how we look at how institutions look at Chicano studies. And when I say tolerance, the first one is there's sometimes are seen as a problem. And it's a problem meaning that we need to have them because we need to comply with some of the federal and state regulations that deal with social equity. But it's always from a deficit perspective as opposed to an additive perspective. So what we have seen about Chicano studies is that they bring an additive value. What do we mean by an additive value? That some of the latest research begins to point to the socio-emotional climate that students begin to feel when they find a department that is able to speak to them about how to navigate and demystify the educational system. And specifically, I'm reminded of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which basically says that you take the experiences of students to contextualize the concepts that are being presented. And so having faculty that are knowledgeable of the culture, the historical, the psychological trauma that exists in many settings, that the students begin to connect their social reality with the university curriculum, but through a context that is comprehensible to them. So the socio-emotional, the zone of proximal development, and also the understanding of challenging our students through a supported system in terms of academic rigor is very, very critical. So this paradigm of looking at Chicano studies as a problem or as a resource or as a civil rights right for students to have an understanding of their own history and how their own history has contributed to the development of our democracy and process, which also leads to the importance of when I mentioned also that it's one of tolerance, that if we don't have the tenure faculty in place, then Chicano studies programs become very, very fragile. And that's what we see in the community college system, where we have few tenure track faculty that are able to sustain Chicano studies, but at the same time, as the population of Raza increases, that there's tremendous need for looking at Chicano studies from a very holistic perspective of academics.
Yeah, you mentioned some things very important there toward the end in terms of the numbers of Chicano faculty that we have in San Diego institutions of higher education. And I think most of those institutions would say, well, we've made progress. We have a higher number of faculty than we used to. But as you mentioned, Alberto, they're not taking account of the increasing size of the Chicano student population. So as our students grow in size, and again, most of the public institutions in San Diego County they declared themselves and have registered as Hispanic serving institutions. So do you feel, Alberto, or to what degree do you think our local institutions are keeping up in terms of hiring sufficient numbers of Chicano faculty, and not just in Chicano studies, of course, but across the entire academic curriculum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If we look at probably one of the, in my opinion, an institution that is moving a little faster than others, specifically I'm speaking about San Diego State in reference to your question, that while the student population is over 30% Raza at San Diego State as a minimum, and at the state level 54%, that the faculty at San Diego State reaches only 9% Chicano Latino faculty. So you can see the gap in terms of, if you use the metric of 30%, which is the existing population of Latinos at San Diego State, or the K-12 system, which is 54%. And you say, why only 9%? And that has moved over the last, I would say 10 years, from let's say 6% to 9%. So there's still a tremendous need. And at the administrative level, it's comparable. There's under a new Latina leadership, it's increasing, but the administrative percentage is 17% of Latinos. So you look at this incredible gap between what is equity and what should be versus what is. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned Alberto, something very important there also, and it leads us to the final question I'd like you to reflect on today, and that's the question of Chicano leadership on our college campuses. And I think that's been one of the priorities that our Concilio has really struggled with for over 30 years, to try to increase the representation of Chicanos at the highest levels of leadership in our colleges and universities. So what would be your reflection now, Alberto, in terms of how, again, we're doing locally with the appointment of Chicanos in higher education leadership positions? And if so, what difference are they making?
Yeah, we're beginning to see, I think in the last year or two, or the last 3 years, we're beginning to see the presence of Chicano Latino leadership that is more knowledgeable about the existing presence of Chicano Latino students as well as community. And I'm talking about Carlos Cortez in the San Diego City College District, and I'm talking about Adela de la Torre and Hector Ochoa, the academic provost at San Diego State, and in Cuyamaca we have Juliana Barn. And then at Palomar recently, it's Esther Rivera, and at Southwest Community College, Mark Sanchez. So we're beginning to build this critical mass. So the next question is that most of the leadership needs to respond to a Senate. And Senates at universities, whether it's junior college or the CSU, UC, have tremendous amount of power. So there's tremendous amount of challenge of and I guess gets to the question of the diversity of our faculty. And so most of our senates at each institution have tremendous power in terms of influencing or questioning the policies of promoting or resisting to the policies of our leadership. So but we're looking for is transformative leadership that is socially conscious about what is needed without apologizing as to why we're doing that and negotiating. And we're looking at the reality of what's going on at the national level with Congress, which they're negotiating what is minimum in order to respond to social crisis. So our leadership, and this brings to mind some of the questions that the Concilio has been addressing in terms of looking at the historical legacy of what has transpired in terms of leadership in the past and what should be, and begin to, for our community, collective community, to begin both supporting but also challenging our Chicano leadership. And so compositional diversity does matter, and the leadership of higher education it's influential in pushing this compositional diversity at all levels, not only in terms of faculty and administration, but also in other, as we talked about support systems or the infrastructure within the university to support our students.
Well, I like very much the way you put that. I know for all the years that I worked with students at the university level, we always talked about the important principle of challenge and support, that if we want our students to be successful, we need to challenge them, as you say, with academic rigor. Well, we also need to support them with effective services. And as you just stated very well, I think the same principle applies to our Chicano leadership in higher education, that they need our support, but we need to challenge them as well. So
yeah, I think one of the concepts that is important for us to have is that I see Concilio as a critical friend, and critical in terms that we are concerned with where we are in terms of access, but we will work with you and through you. So.
Yes. Alberto, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today on our program and for your reflections and comments. Thank you all, folks, for watching today. Muchísimas gracias. And we will continue to bring you information on the activities and the priorities of the San Diego Chicano Latino Concilio on higher education. Thank you very much.